Let me say this right at the start. If you think this is just another war update, just another headline, just another day in a region that seems permanently on edge, stop right there. Because what happened here is not small. And it is definitely not routine. When the United States starts bringing new strike tools into a live war with Iran, and then a drone gets shot down near the US Embassy in Baghdad, that is not just noise in the background, that is a warning sign. That is a signal that the military temperature in this conflict is still dangerously high, even when politicians keep talking about pauses, diplomacy, and de-escalation. Reuters reported on March 1st that the U.S. used Lucas one-way attack drones for the first time in combat in strikes on Iran, and Reuters reported yesterday that a surveillance drone was brought down near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, triggering activation of U.S. Embassy and Iraqi defense systems. That should get your attention immediately. Because once a war enters the phase where new tools are being fielded and embassy defenses are going live in the capital of a neighboring state, you're no longer looking at a conflict that is winding down neatly. You're looking at a conflict that is still searching for its next shape. And that is what makes this so dangerous. Now here is what we actually know. Reuters reported that on March 1st, the United States carried out major strikes on Iran using a mix of Tomahawk cruise missiles, B-2 bombers, fighter aircraft, and, for the first time in combat, Lucas one-way attack drones, a relatively low-cost loitering weapon modeled on the broader shift toward affordable mass warfare. That is important because it shows the U.S. is not fighting this war with only the old, familiar tools of overwhelming force. It is also bringing in newer, cheaper, more scalable systems that can change how pressure is applied over time. Then yesterday, Reuters reported that a surveillance drone was shot down near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Iraqi security sources said it happened early Thursday, but it was not immediately clear exactly how the drone was brought down, and the drone's origin or intent was not disclosed. What Reuters did report is that U.S. Embassy and Iraqi defense systems were activated in response. Now stop and think about that combination. On one side, the U.S. is proving it is willing to widen the menu of weapons it uses against Iran. On the other, the region is so unstable that even a single drone incident near a U.S. diplomatic compound can put defensive systems on alert. That is not stability. That is a live battlefield spreading stress across the map, and that is where the real story begins. Because the biggest mistake people make with military news is assuming that the dramatic part is always the loudest part. They look for the explosion, the strike footage, the missile trail, the fiery headline. But in a war like this, the more important story is often structural. What is being added? What is being activated? What is being normalized? What is being tested under real combat conditions that may matter much more in week 6 than it did in week 1? That is why the Lucas detail matters so much. A new strike weapon entering combat is not just a tactical note. It is a window into how Washington is thinking. Reuters described Lucas as a lower-cost, one-way attack drone, part of the Pentagon's move toward warfare by affordable mass. In plain English, that means the United States is adapting to a world where not every mission can be done with only the most expensive missiles and aircraft. It means quantity, cost, and replaceability are becoming part of the strategy. And if you are sitting in Tehran, that message lands hard. Because it tells you this is not just a campaign of prestige weapons and symbolic strikes. It tells you the United States is thinking about sustainability. It is thinking about how to keep pressure on without burning through only the most exquisite platforms. It is thinking about scale. And once the world's biggest military starts showing it can combine stealth bombers, cruise missiles, fighters, and low-cost one-way drones in the same campaign, the signal is not subtle. The signal is, we are not out of options. Now here is where it gets more serious. A lot of people hear drone shot down and assume the story is immediately simple. Enemy drone, U.S. response, end of story. But that is not what Reuters reported. Reuters said the drone brought down near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was a surveillance drone, and the exact method of the takedown, its origin, and its intent remained unclear. That uncertainty matters, because uncertainty is one of the most dangerous parts of this war. A region already on edge does not need perfect clarity to become more dangerous. It only needs repeated moments that force militaries to react quickly while facts lag behind. A drone over the green zone, defense systems activating, questions about who sent it, questions about what it was doing, questions about whether it was probing, watching, distracting, or preparing the ground for something else. That is how pressure works in modern conflict, not always through major attack, sometimes through persistent ambiguity, and this war is full of ambiguity. Reuters has already reported that an Iraqi security incident earlier this week involved Iraqi forces opening fire on a drone over Baghdad's green zone, though that drone escaped, and it noted that the area has faced recent rocket and drone attacks following the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. In other words, yesterday's downed drone did not appear out of nowhere. It fits into a pattern of growing aerial tension around high-value sites that should worry people. Because embassies are not just buildings, they're political tripwires. When defenses go active around a U.S. embassy in the middle of a regional war, everybody understands the stakes. One misread signal, one successful strike, one wrongly attributed attack, and suddenly the diplomatic space shrinks while the military space expands. That is why incidents like this matter even before all the facts are known. Now let's talk about the wider context, because this is what turns two separate stories into one larger warning. Reuters reported last month that the United States' war with Iran involved not only bombers and missiles, but also AI-assisted targeting workflows and the first combat use of Lucas drones. Separately, Reuters and AP reported in early April that Iran shot down U.S. military aircraft, including an F-15E, showing that this conflict has already moved beyond one-sided standoff pressure into direct, costly military confrontation. That means every new weapon introduced into the fight matters more. Every new drone incident matters more. Every activation of defensive systems matters more, because both sides have already proven they are willing to absorb and impose real military losses. And that is where the tension becomes structural. The U.S. is clearly trying to shape the battlefield with more flexible tools. Lucas drones point to a model of warfare that is cheaper, more numerous, and potentially easier to sustain than relying only on high-end missiles. Reuters' March 1st reporting makes clear that the Pentagon is experimenting in this war with a broader ecosystem of strike options. Iran, meanwhile, has shown it can still generate serious danger. Reuters reported on April 3rd that a U.S. fighter jet was shot down over Iran, and AP reported 2 U.S. military aircraft were downed in separate incidents. That matters because it destroys any fantasy that the battlefield is frictionless for Washington. So when you put the pieces together, this is the picture you get. America is adapting, Iran is still dangerous, and the region around them is getting more reactive by the day. That is why the drone over Baghdad matters. Not because it proves one side or the other is about to launch an immediate major offensive, but because it shows how little slack remains in the system. A surveillance drone appears near the U.S. Embassy. Defense systems activate. The object is shot down. The origin is unclear. And instantly everyone has to think through the worst-case possibilities. That is not a calm theater. That is a compressed theater. And compressed theaters are where mistakes become escalation. Now, for a U.S. audience, here is the blunt version. The story is not simply that America has a new tool. The story is that America seems to be preparing for a conflict environment where new tools are necessary because this war may demand a different kind of endurance than older campaigns. Reuters reporting on Lucas suggests the Pentagon is looking at cost-effective systems that can support sustained operations. That points to a military planning mindset focused not just on power, but on staying power. That should tell you something important. Washington may still talk about pressure, deterrence, and diplomacy, but militarily, it is behaving like a country that wants options if this drags on. And that is exactly why Tehran will be paying attention. A new one-way attack drone in combat says, "We are adapting." A shot-down surveillance drone near the U.S. Embassy says, "The environment is still extremely hot." Put those two together, and the message is not subtle. This war is still evolving, and nobody should assume the current balance is stable. Now here is the contradiction. Politically, there is always pressure to tell the public that things are under control. Militarily, systems are being activated around embassies. Politically, there is pressure to say diplomacy can still work. Militarily, new strike systems are entering the war. Politically, leaders want to talk about managed escalation. Militarily, the fog of war keeps producing events that can be misread in real time. That contradiction is where the danger lives, because when the public story and the battlefield story diverge too much, the next crisis can hit harder than expected. And right now, the battlefield story is this. The United States is still testing and expanding how it applies force. Iran is still capable of inflicting military pain, and the region remains so jumpy that drone incidents near the most sensitive sites immediately trigger defense responses. That is not a war heading neatly toward closure. That is a war still searching for leverage. So what happens next? There are only a few possibilities. One, the U.S. continues integrating lower-cost strike systems while trying to keep pressure on Iran without triggering a bigger regional rupture. Two, Iran and its partners keep using drones, surveillance, probing, and asymmetric pressure to stretch U.S. responses and expose weak points. Or three, one of these small incidents, a drone near an embassy, a misidentified object, an overreaction, a delayed identification, becomes the spark that drags the next phase of the conflict into a much uglier place. And that third possibility is the one serious people watch most closely, because history is full of wars where the next major escalation did not begin with the largest attack. It began with the wrong event at the wrong place under the wrong level of tension. That is why this story matters. Not because the exact headline claim is fully proven, but because the verified facts underneath it are already serious enough. The U.S. has introduced new strike tools into the Iran conflict. A surveillance drone was shot down near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad with defensive systems activated. And this is happening in a war where U.S. aircraft have already been lost and the region is already saturated with risk. So the real takeaway is simple. This is not a quiet period. This is not a stable pause. This is a phase of the war where new weapons, nervous defenses, and constant drone pressure are combining into something very dangerous. A battlefield where even the small incidents are no longer small. And once a war reaches that stage, the question is not whether people are paying attention. The question is whether they are paying attention fast enough.